So for the sake of the video, this is a Bokken session as part of the Kajuen room. I've been meaning to film this for a long time anyway. This is a rationale on why it is that we use the Bokken as part of Aiki-Jujitsu. We're just filming a session. I'm not doing a specific video for YouTube, but I'm thinking other people will benefit from this as well. So I'm not addressing the camera, I'm actually addressing students here. So, Bokken, history of the Bokken in a nutshell. The Bokken represents the Japanese sword. Okay, so curved, single blade, roughly the same weight and balance. They're invented by the samurai as a method of safe sword practice, but they are still capable of killing. The amount of impact you get behind them, head injury and cave sculling, so they still are deadly weapons. Okay. The founder of Aikido, Morihei Ueshiba, studied several arts. Primarily he studied the Daito-ryu of Aiki-Jujitsu, but he also studied extensively in the Yagyu-ryu, the Shinkagi-ryu, and several other systems. He spent a lot of time studying Kenjutsu, Japanese swordsmanship. And as he was putting together his interpretation of Aiki-Jujitsu, which ultimately became Aikido, he realised that there was great relationship between the sword arts and the unarmed arts. And this was the fundamentals of Aikido. It is said that Aikido is the art of the sword without a sword. And you see many techniques within pretty much all the Aikido syllabus is the sword, which is quite bizarre. But when you make that revelation, it does make things make a lot of sense. Therefore, in my opinion, if you're going to practice an Aiki art, be it Aikido, Aiki-Jujitsu, Aiki-Jitsu, Aiki-no-Jitsu, then you should be studying the sword. To my mind, if you're not practicing the sword, practicing the Bokken, then you are losing out on an essential part of training in that concept. Okay? You're missing out on the spirit of the style, and I appreciate even using that word is going to be a tad controversial. But in my opinion, that is true. You need to study the sword. We've got it in our syllabus at a fairly high grade from first Q onwards. The reason being, first you've got to earn the right to earn and the privilege of learning the sword. And secondly, actually there's not a lot of technique to it. It's very precise, requires a lot of patience. So I'm only teaching it to people who really have been training for a good 3 to 4 to 5 years. Okay, so this is why. My opinion is that learning the sword will enhance your Aiki-Jujitsu. Okay? You will understand the reason your body moves in certain ways. You'll also understand the dynamics of movement. Now, to give you an example, in Aiki systems, again, Aikido, Aiki-Jujitsu, you will often get attacks that, if I borrow Sensei Will there, the common unarmed attacks you will get will be Shomen Shuto Uchi, okay? And then you'll get your Yokomen Shuto Uchi. And these are sword attacks. Now we, as a pragmatic interpretation of Aiki-Jujitsu, we all use sticks, we use rubber bottles, so this downward movement, because nowhere in the whole history of ever, on a Friday night in the centre of Worcester has anybody ever gone, I'm taking a dislike to you. Okay, it just doesn't happen. Whereas a downward strike with an implement certainly does. So that's why that we practice it. And this kind of side knife hand, again, this just doesn't happen in reality. But a slash across the face with a knife or a bottle does. Okay. Now, when you train, however you train, there's always a degree of artificiality. You can't remove that, and you address it by doing partner drills, by using focus mitts. So everything that you do, ultimately, you address every aspect. But you have to train artificiality. You can't not. If you didn't, you'd have no students left. Okay, because they'd all be battered. And the thing is, you do partner work, and you inherently have to pull technique. So you get the focus mitts, and therefore you can learn to not pull it, to go through it. We all know, every half-decent martial artist knows that when you punch, you don't punch to the target, you punch through the target. So, my target is this poor person's face over here. And, that Sensei Will is in the way is entirely Sensei Will's problem. And this is why I detest with a vengeance the term chop, which implies to hack at. And when you learn the sword, and you learn to cut through everything, it does change your body dynamic. Okay? So we start to appreciate that when I'm going to cut Will's head off, I'm not going to go hack. Okay? When I cut Will's head off, I'm going to be cutting straight through. So you learn to use your hips, use your shoulders and pull everything through. So it's a complete dynamic movement. So the very idea that you're considering cutting, to my mind, changes your Aiki-Jujitsu. Okay? What is interesting, Aikido, Aiki, harmonious spirit. I is a concept, it's not a single word. I means mutuality, working with somebody. It refers to timing. Okay? Aikido, but also Iaido, which is the art of the sword drawing. There's got to be something in that, Aikido, Iaido. It's all about mutuality, so inherently, Aikido, you've got notions of the sword, even in the name, and indeed you also get Iuchi, which is mutual striking, mutual death, essentially. So this is why we practice the Bokken, that's the reason. People will say, yes, but you can train those concepts without using the sword. Yeah, you certainly can, and many martial artists do and have. But there are more than one way, there's more than one path up the mountain. This is the path that we are choosing to walk. It gives us a link to the culture and history as well, which a lot of people find fascinating. I certainly do. I think it gives depth to what we do. So that, I hope, makes sense. We're going to move on now and talk, and we're going to do green technique. But I hope that makes sense to people watching as well. So how do techniques relate with or without Bokken? I'm just going to show a couple of techniques from our syllabus that involve the use of the Bokken. So in this case, what's happened, I'm carrying my Bokken at my left hip. I perceive a threat, and my intention is going to be to draw the Bokken and cut. So what will happen here is, as I go to seize, my opponent arrests my wrist. And what I do is secure his finger, lift, and I put the handle, the tsuka, against the distal arm, against the weak point of the wrist, and push down. Now, I mean, any half-decent Aikido-ka or Aiki-Jujitsu-ka will just go, but that's Aikido's Nikio, mobilisation number 2, and yeah, absolutely it is. And many people do actually understand that. It is a revelation to some people, but not to others. So very briefly, here, and as he's down, I'm then in a position to do more nasty things, like decapitate him. Another one will be that I've already got my Bokken out and he takes a hold. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn and cut his ankle. I step through, lift, and I turn. And again, Aikido people will just go, that's Shiinagi. And that is, the Shiinagi is the decapitation, the cutting down. I'll show that again from a different angle. It's quite a complex technique. So he cuts, or he grabs, sorry. I turn, and my initial movement that starts my hips going is me cutting his ankle. I step across and I turn. Already I've got the rotation on his arm that is characteristic of Shiinagi. I turn, this will rest across his throat, and there's the cut. So this is how the techniques all do relate. Aiki-Jujitsu or Aikido and the sword, the Kenjutsu or the Aiki-Jujitsu are not isolated arts, they do all relate. Okay? So I hope that makes a lot of sense to you, and thanks, Sensei.